The rain fell in sheets over Seoul, cutting through the neon glow of the red light district where law and order feared to tread. Kang Min-ho stood alone at the edge of a rooftop, his dark suit drenched, his jaw clenched as police sirens wailed below, rivals eliminated, enemies silenced, but the weight of his empire crushing his chest. Then she stumbled into his world. Maya, with honey-brown skin glistening with rain, desperate eyes carrying secrets darker than his own, colliding into him not by accident but by fate. When their eyes locked, his cold, obsidian lethal, hers warm, terrified, searching, something fractured inside the untouchable Mafia king. She saw the man beneath the monster. He saw the woman worth destroying everything for. In that single moment, a dangerous obsession ignited. This was not a love story. This was a reckoning. Welcome to Afro-Korean romance, where love has no borders. If you believe in love, please like, share, and subscribe for more Afro-Korean romance stories. The sound of shattered glass echoed through the Golden Dragon nightclub, Seoul's most exclusive and most dangerous establishment. Kang Min-ho didn't flinch. He never did. He sat at the corner table, a glass of aged whiskey untouched before him, watching the chaos unfold with the detached interest of a man who orchestrated violence the way most people ordered coffee. Around him, his men in tailored black suits moved with precision, disarming 3 rival Yakuza operatives who'd been foolish enough to think they could muscle in on his territory. It took 90 seconds. That was all Min-ho needed. By the time the police would receive their anonymous tip, the bodies would be gone, the security footage erased, and the Golden Dragon would be flawless, a glittering temple of wealth and power where nothing messy ever happened. That was Min-ho's skill, not just violence, erasure, boss. His second-in-command, Tae-sung, appeared at his shoulder. Clean! Always. Min-ho finally lifted the whiskey to his lips, the burn welcome against the cold that had settled in his chest years ago, around the time he'd realized that power required him to become something less than human. The usual accounts triple their family's insurance. It was the one mercy he allowed himself. The families of many killed would never want for money. He'd learned long ago that monsters could have codes. It didn't make them less monstrous, it just made them tolerable to themselves. The club's VIP section overlooked the main floor where Seoul's elite danced in calculated ignorance. They knew the Golden Dragon's owner was dangerous. They simply didn't care as long as his money was as golden as his reputation was dark. Min-ho's phone buzzed. A text from his youngest brother, Seo-jun. Father's getting worse. Doctor says 3 months, maybe less. He set the phone down without responding. What could he say? That he'd become a mafia king to protect their family's honor after their father's legitimate business crumbled. That every deal, every murder, every compromise of his soul was supposed to ensure they never knew poverty or powerlessness again. That their father would rather die than admit his youngest son was the reason the family survived. Min-ho finished his drink and stood. The evening's business was concluded. What remained was the weight, the constant suffocating weight of an empire built on blood and secrets. He was moving toward the private exit when it happened. The back door burst open. Rain poured in with a woman, no, not just a woman, her. Even through the chaos of her entrance, Min-ho felt it like a physical blow. The dark honey of her skin, the desperate wildness of her eyes, the way she stumbled forward in a crimson dress torn at the shoulder, revealing a glimpse of collarbones he shouldn't have noticed and wouldn't forget. She was beautiful, catastrophically beautiful, and she was terrified. Behind her, 3 men in expensive suits were closing in, their intentions unmistakable. Not rape, worse, abduction, kidnapping. The kind of disappearance that left families shattered and police reports cold. Min-ho had maybe 1 second to make a choice. Walk away, let Tae-sung handle it with the standard protocol, remain untouched by whatever drama this woman had wandered into. Instead, he moved. It was pure instinct, the same instinct that had made him a king. He grabbed her wrist, pulled her behind him, and tilted his head slightly at the would-be kidnappers. The message was simple: she's mine now, leave. The men froze. They recognized him. Everyone in Seoul's underworld recognized Kang Min-ho, the Cold Prince, the man who'd taken his father's crumbling legitimate empire and transformed it into a criminal dynasty that made the Yakuza look quaint by comparison. Apologies, sir, the lead man stammered, already backing away. We didn't know she was. I don't care what you know. Min-ho's voice was ice. Leave Seoul by dawn. If I hear you've stayed, I'll find your families. I'll make sure their last memories aren't of your faces. They left. The entire interaction had taken perhaps 2 minutes. Now Min-ho was alone with this woman, her wrist still in his grip, her breath coming in ragged gasps. He released her slowly as though she might shatter. Up close she was even more striking. Her dark eyes were wide with shock and something else, a recognition perhaps that she'd just been saved by the devil himself. Who are you? She whispered. Min-ho took in her appearance, the torn dress, the scrapes on her palms, the desperate hunger in her eyes that went beyond physical fear. This woman had been running from more than those men. Someone you should forget, he said quietly. Are you hurt? She shook her head, not breaking eye contact. Why did you help me? It was a dangerous question. The honest answer terrified him, because the moment I saw you, something in me that died years ago started to bleed again. Instead, he said, my name is Min-ho, what's yours? Maya. Her voice was barely audible. I don't know how to thank you. Don't. He turned away, needing distance from her from the way his chest was constricting. There's a car outside. My driver Tae-sung will take you wherever you need to go. Tell him anything. Ask for anything, it's yours. She reached out, her fingers brushing his arm. The contact sent electricity through him, unwelcome, dangerous electricity. I don't even know your name, not really. He looked back at her, and in that moment something shifted in his chest, something broke open. Minho, Kang Minho, and I need you to understand something, Maya. If those men find you again, if anyone threatens you, you call me. You don't ask how, you don't hesitate. He pulled out his phone, handed it to her with the contact screen blank. Put your number in, do it now. She did, her hands trembling. When she handed back the phone, their fingers brushed again, and he felt that electricity again, this time like a warning, like standing at the edge of a cliff. Go, he said softly. Before I make a decision that ruins both of us. She left. T-Sung materialized to escort her to the car, and Minho watched from the shadows as the rain swallowed her form. Only when her vehicle had disappeared into the neon-soaked Seoul night did he allow himself to look at his phone. Her number was saved under a single name. Maya awoken. It was a joke, but it wasn't. He'd been asleep for 28 years, walking through the world as though it held nothing but transactions and territories and the endless machinery of survival. In 90 seconds, this woman had fractured that carefully constructed numbness, and he had no idea if that made her his salvation or his destruction. Minho didn't sleep. He sat in his penthouse office on the 73rd floor of Seoul's most exclusive high-rise, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a city that bowed to him, and made decisions that would change everything. By dawn, he'd uncovered her life. Maya Okafor, 24 years old, Nigerian-born, raised partially in London, had come to Seoul 6 months ago on a student visa to study international relations at Seoul National University. She lived in a small shared apartment in Hongdae, worked part-time at a cafe, and wrote. Obsessively, it seemed, her apartment's walls were reportedly covered in sketches and plans for stories that never got finished. She had no family in Korea. Her parents were in Lagos, successful and distant. She'd come to Seoul to escape something. The file wasn't specific and had been thriving until 3 weeks ago when she'd caught the attention of someone Minho recognized as a human trafficker named Yoon Jae-won, a small-time operator working for the Russian syndicate. That was why those men had grabbed her. They'd learned she'd seen something at a restaurant, a transaction, and exchanged details of shipments moving through the port. She was a liability to be eliminated or disappeared, until Minho had claimed her. He didn't examine why that claim made him feel something like peace. Instead, he picked up his phone and made a single call. Find Yoon Jae-won, he told his informant. I want to know every dealing he's had, every connection, every place he's hidden, and put eyes on her, the girl. I want to know everywhere she goes, everyone she talks to. I want reports every 6 hours, came the careful response. Are we eliminating the threat? Minho looked out at the sunrise, painting Seoul in shades of gold and crimson. No, we're eliminating anyone who ever looks at her wrong, but we're keeping her alive and untouched. He paused. By anyone but me if necessary. Informant said nothing. He was learning that Minho's mind worked in ways that transcended normal criminal logic. A man like that was either insane or brilliant, possibly both. Across the city in her small shared apartment, Maya woke to text from an unknown number. Breakfast delivered to your building entrance, you'll like it. Minho. She stumbled downstairs, still half asleep, and found a man in a dark suit holding a paper bag from her favorite neighborhood cafe, the one she'd only mentioned to the driver last night in passing. Her heart hammered against her ribs. For the next week it was small things, always. A book she'd mentioned wanting to read, left at her apartment building's entrance by an unknown courier. Her favorite flowers, peach roses, impossible to find in Seoul in winter, delivered to her university library during her study session. A payment to her university, clearing her entire tuition for the semester with a single text. Your education matters to me now. She didn't respond to any of it. Couldn't. Because responding meant acknowledging what was happening. That Kang Minho, the man everyone whispered about in terrified undertones, the man whose name made even professors go quiet, was obsessed with her. And she, God, she wanted it. That was the terrifying part. Maya had always been the overlooked girl, beautiful enough but not stunning, smart but not genius-level brilliant, strong but soft at her core. In Lagos, she'd been the quiet daughter who sketched stories no one read. In London, she'd been the transfer student who ate lunch alone. In Seoul, she'd come hopping to finally be seen. She hadn't expected to be seen by someone who could destroy her with a phone call. On the 8th day she saw him, she was at her cafe, pretending to study while actually staring at her phone, scrolling through news articles about Seoul's underworld. The photographs were frightening. Surveillance shots of Kang Minho at crime scenes, at boardrooms, at events where bodies had later been found. The most recent photo made her breath catch. Him in a tuxedo at some charity event, his expression cold as marble but with something raw in his eyes, like a man looking at a portrait of someone he'd lost. That's an interesting biography you're reading. She looked up. Minho stood beside her table in a black turtleneck and tailored coat, rain droplets still clinging to his dark hair. He was more beautiful in person than any photograph could capture, but also more dangerous. There was something coiled beneath his skin, something that could snap at any moment. Minho, her voice wavered. What are you doing here? He sat down across from her without asking, commanding her full attention with his mere presence. Around them, the cafe's other patrons had gone conspicuously quiet, pretending not to notice. I told you to call me if you were in danger, he said softly. Not to read about me on the internet like I'm some celebrity criminal. I'm not in danger. But her hands were shaking. And I wasn't reading about you. I was just looking at pictures of me while thinking I couldn't see you. He reached across the table and gently took her phone, his fingers brushing hers. The touch sent sparks up her arm. That's very bold, Maya. Dangerous people don't like being watched. Then why do you keep sending me things? The words came out before she could stop them. His expression shifted, something like surprise crossing his features before the coldness returned. Because I need to know you're safe, he said quietly. Because I need to know you're thinking about me the way I'm thinking about you. And because he paused and she saw the struggle playing across his face. Because something in me is breaking and you're the only thing that might piece it back together. Honesty of it devastated her. Men like Minho didn't speak truths. They trafficked in lies and manipulation. Yet here he was, admitting his obsession like a confession in a priest's box. This is insane, she whispered, completely. He leaned back, but his eyes never left her face. I'm a criminal, Maya. I kill people. I've likely killed people you'd be horrified to know about. I have no right to look at you the way I do, no right to want you, and yet, his jaw clenched. And yet I do, and I can't stop. Outside, the rain began to fall harder. It seemed to match the storm rising in her chest, the fear and attraction and longing all tangled together. If I let this happen, she said carefully, if I let you into my life, what happens to me? When you get tired of this, when I become inconvenient, his expression hardened. You won't. How can you be sure? Because, he said, his voice dropping to something darker, something more possessive, I will burn down the world before I let you go. I will become exactly the monster you fear if it means keeping you. So don't ask me how I'm sure. Ask yourself if you're brave enough to test it. He stood, buttoned his coat. Before he left, he reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture so tender it contradicted everything she'd just heard. Finish your coffee, he said. I'll have my driver bring you home. And Maya, stop reading about me. Start talking to me instead. There are far too many lies about who I am. He was gone before she could respond, leaving her with the ghost of his touch and the terrifying realization that she was already falling. 3 weeks later, Maya had become a fixture in Minho's world, though he kept her carefully compartmentalized, away from the violence and blood. She came to his penthouse on weekends where they'd sit in his library surrounded by books in silence, talking about everything except the empire that sustained him. He'd ask about her writing. She'd sketch him not from memory, but from observation, capturing the careful way he held tension in his shoulders, the softness that emerged when he thought no one was watching. He'd buy her things and she'd pretend to be exasperated, but they both knew she was thrilled. A vintage typewriter with her initials engraved on the base, first editions of her favorite authors, a jade pendant that he'd told her belonged to his mother, who'd died when he was young. Wear this, he'd commanded softly, fastening the chain around her neck. So when I can't be with you, part of me still is. It was the kind of possessiveness that should have terrified her. Instead, it made her feel seen in a way she'd never been before. But safety is a luxury criminals can't afford. She learned that lesson a Wednesday evening in a restaurant, one of the few places Minho took her outside the penthouse, a private establishment where no photographers could intrude. They were celebrating her 20th birthday, though it wasn't actually until the following week. Minho had insisted on doing it here now in this place that belonged entirely to him. Happy birthday, he whispered, pressing a small velvet box into her hand. Inside was a diamond ring, not an engagement ring, but something close, a promise perhaps or a claim. Minho, this is appropriate for a woman who's about to become my entire life, he finished. Wear it, let people know you're unavailable. She should have asked what he meant. She didn't. That's when Seo-jun walked in. Minho's youngest brother appeared in the doorway of the private room, snow still clinging to his dark hair, his eyes wild with the kind of panic that didn't suit someone born into Minho's world. Young father's collapsed. The doctors say it's the end. Hours, maybe less. Ho's entire body went rigid. In that moment, Maya watched the facade crack, the carefully constructed controls slipping away to reveal the man underneath. The son who loved his father, the brother who still cared, he stood, and the cold Minho returned, locking away his vulnerability. Tell Taesung to bring the car, I'm going to the hospital. Wait, he turned back to Maya and his expression was unreadable. Go back to my penthouse. Seo-jun will have someone escort you. Do not leave. Do not answer your phone for anyone but me. Do you understand? She nodded, confused and frightened by the sudden shift. By the time their driver dropped her at the tower, she knew something was terribly wrong. The staff moved with unusual urgency. There were more men stationed at entrances. Phones rang constantly with coded messages. In the penthouse, alone with her thoughts and his absence, Maya realized the truth. She'd fallen in love with a man whose world had rules that transcended human decency. And when that world demanded his attention, she would always come second. 26 hours passed without word from Minho. Maya existed in a state of suspended animation, moving through the penthouse like a ghost, touching his belongings and wondering if she'd ever see him again. There were books on his nightstand, philosophy, poetry, strategy. A framed photograph on his desk showing 3 Korean men who looked like versions of him, frozen in a moment of youth before power and tragedy had aged them, his brothers, she realized, the ones she'd never met. Around hour 18, she heard shouting from downstairs, Seo-jun's voice raw with grief. She crept to the hallway and caught fragments. Has 3 hours ago. And Minho hasn't spoken since. And the business, his father was dead. She wanted to go to him, to hold him, to offer whatever comfort a woman like her could give to a man like him. But Minho had commanded her to stay hidden, and she was learning that his commands were absolute, even when delivered absent of his presence. When he finally returned, 34 hours later, he was a different person. Oh, the facade was intact, the expensive suit, the controlled posture, the ice in his gaze. But she could see it underneath, a man hollowed out, operating on machinery and spite. Minho, she stood when he entered his bedroom where she'd eventually retreated. I'm so sorry about your father. They treat you well. His voice was mechanical. Did you have everything you needed? Yes, but good. He turned away, beginning to remove his cufflinks. Starting tomorrow, there will be increases to security. My enemies will test my position now that father is gone. I need to respond decisively. There will be developments, complications, times when I'm unreachable. She understood what he wasn't saying. His ability to be with her, to nurture what was growing between them, would be compromised. The empire demanded its price. I understand, she said quietly. Do you? He turned to face her and she saw the desperation beneath the control. Because I don't think you do, Maya. I don't think you understand what it means to love someone like me. There are things I've done, things I'm going to do, things that will require you to love me despite knowing exactly how dark I am. She moved closer, closing the distance between them. Then tell me, stop keeping me in the safe parts of your life. Let me see all of you. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he pulled her against him, burying his face in her hair. If I do that, I lose my right to be soft with you. I lose my right to pretend I'm anything other than a monster. Then be a monster, she whispered. But be my monster and let me be whatever I need to be to survive loving you. He lifted her chin and kissed her, and it was unlike any kiss they'd shared before. It was desperate and hungry and tasted like grief and obsession, and a man claiming the only good thing left in his world. When they pulled apart, his eyes were black with want, but something held him back. Tonight, he said hoarsely, tonight you sleep, and tomorrow I'll show you exactly who you're in love with. Morning came gray and cold. Minho sat across from her at breakfast, dressed in black despite the bright winter sun pouring through the windows. He looked like he hadn't slept because he likely hadn't. There's a warehouse in Gangnam, he said without preamble. One of Yoon Jae-won's operations. The same man who tried to have you kidnapped. Maya's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Been gathering intelligence for weeks. He's moved 3,000 units of human trafficking materials through that facility. Families destroyed, women and children sold into modern slavery. Minho's voice was eerily calm. Today I'm going to burn that operation to the ground, literally and figuratively. Oh, you said you wanted to see all of me, that you wanted the truth. He met her eyes. This is the truth. I'm not a good man playing a dangerous role. I'm a dangerous man choosing sometimes to be gentle with you, but I will never be good. And this industry, this specific violation of human dignity is a line I've drawn. What are you going to do? What needs to be done? He stood, moving to the window. The warehouse will be seized by authorities by sunset, but before that I'll take possession of all documentation, all evidence of Yoon's dealings. And I'll ensure that every person involved in that supply chain pays for their crimes. You're going to kill them. Not even a flinch. And I'm going to do it in a way that makes sure no one else tries the same trade. That's the language my world understands, Maya. Mercy gets you killed. Compassion gets interpreted as weakness. The only thing that keeps the innocent, even those peripherally connected to my empire, alive is the certainty that I'm more ruthless than anyone foolish enough to test me. Maya stood and moved to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. I'm coming with you. Absolutely not. You said show me all of you. That means I see the cost of being with you, the actual cost, not the pleasant penthouse version where I sketch you and you buy me gifts. She pressed her forehead against his back. If I'm going to love you, I need to know exactly what that costs. He turned and gripped her shoulders, his expression tormented. Maya, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. You're about to do something terrible and necessary, and you're terrified it will make me hate you. She reached up and cupped his face. It won't, but I need to see that you're human underneath this, that it costs you something. He studied her face and she watched the internal war play across his features. Finally, he nodded. Stay in the car, you see nothing, you hear nothing, and when I tell you to cover your ears, you do it. Understood, understood. Warehouse was nondescript, hidden in an industrial area where no one asked questions. Taesung and 8 other men waited by a black van, weapons concealed beneath their clothes. This was Minho's world, efficient, cold, utterly organized. He kissed her forehead before leaving the car. 1 hour, don't move. Then he was gone, swallowed by the darkness of the warehouse, and Maya was alone with the sound of her heartbeat and the knowledge that she was waiting for a man to return from committing murder. The first 30 minutes were quiet. She told herself she wouldn't look, but her eyes kept drifting to the warehouse entrance. Just watching, just waiting. At minute 32 she heard the first scream. It wasn't from violence, it was terror and relief mixed together. Men and women stumbled out of the warehouse, confusion and hope on their faces. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Minho emerged 4 minutes later, his white dress shirt somehow still pristine, his hands perfectly clean. He slid into the car and immediately started the engine, pulling away into traffic as the first police vehicles raced toward the warehouse. 47 people freed, he said quietly, his hands steady on the wheel despite the flood of adrenaline that should have made them shake. 63 arrests made thanks to the documentation I provided to authorities. And Yoon Jae-won. He's currently in a private medical facility being kept alive by machines, unable to ever harm anyone again. Maya's stomach twisted. I didn't kill him, I'm preserving him as a permanent reminder to everyone in my network that I don't tolerate human trafficking. He glanced at her. That was mercy in the language of my world. She didn't feel sick, that frightened her more than anything. You okay? He asked, genuine concern in his voice. I don't know, she admitted. I watched you commit crimes and free people simultaneously. I watched law enforcement arrive right on schedule, which means you planned this with the police, which means you own pieces of them. And I'm still here, I'm not leaving, that makes me complicit. It does, he agreed without apology. Welcome to the real cost of loving me, Maya. You're not innocent anymore, you'll never be innocent again. Anyone connected to me becomes part of the machine. She looked at him, at the beautiful, powerful, utterly dangerous man who become her entire world in just 3 weeks, and made a choice. I'm okay with that, she said softly. Because if loving you costs me my innocence, then I'm paying the price willingly. All of it. He reached over and squeezed her hand, and it was perhaps the most intimate gesture he'd ever made, not claiming but accepting her choice. Accepting that she'd seen his darkness and chosen him anyway. The next 2 weeks were a blur of wedding preparations that Min-ho accelerated with the kind of single-minded focus he brought to everything. Why the rush? Maya asked, surrounded by dress designers and wedding planners. We've only known each other for a month. Because my world doesn't allow for long engagements, he said simply. And because you're going to tell me you're pregnant very soon and I want that ring on your finger before the news becomes public. She froze. What? He looked up from his phone, an expression of certainty on his face. You're not using protection, I'm not using protection. You'll be pregnant within the month, statistically guaranteed given how often I need you. And I want to be married before that happens because I won't allow anyone to question the legitimacy of our child. It was utterly arrogant and completely logical, and she hated that she found it endearing. What if I don't want to get pregnant? She asked carefully. Then you'll take the precautions I provide and will respect that choice. He set down his phone. But you do want it, I can see it in your face when you look at other people's children, and I want it too, Maya. I want to build a life with you that transcends everything I've built before. She should have been terrified by his certainty, his control, his absolute conviction that he could predict her future. Instead, she was drowning in how much she loved him. The wedding was arranged for 3 weeks later, to be held at a private estate outside Seoul. The guest list would include only people Min-ho trusted implicitly, other crime lords, corrupted officials, and his family. It was a wedding that would send shockwaves through Seoul's underworld. The Cold Prince finally claimed. A week before the ceremony, everything fractured. She was leaving the university library when she saw him, a tall man with Western features watching her from across the plaza. When their eyes met, he smiled, and then he was moving toward her with purposeful strides. Maya Akafer. His English was perfect, his accent vaguely American. I'm Detective Richards, FBI. I'd like to ask you some questions about Kang Min-ho. Everything went cold. I'm not answering questions without a lawyer. Interesting response from someone with no criminal record. He showed her his credentials. Here's what I know. Kang Min-ho is one of Seoul's most dangerous organized crime leaders. And you're currently wearing his ring and scheduled to marry him in 7 days, which makes you either extremely brave or extremely foolish. Or both, she said quietly. If you're FBI, you have no jurisdiction in Seoul. No, we don't, but we're very interested in your fiancé's illegal arms dealing, his connections to Russian syndicates, and his recent expansion into cryptocurrency fraud. And we'd like you to testify against him. You haven't heard my offer. I don't care about your offer. She started walking and he followed. I love him and I'm not betraying him regardless of what he's done. He'll destroy you, Richard said, not unkindly. Men like him always do. I've seen it 100 times. They claim to care and then when it's convenient they discard their women like they never meant anything. Something sharp and angry rose in her chest. You don't know him. I know his type and I'm offering you an exit. I said no. She turned on him, her eyes flashing. I don't want an exit. I want the future I've chosen, which happens to include a man you consider a criminal. That's my right. She made it back to Min-ho's penthouse without another word, her heart hammering. The FBI, they wanted her to testify. They thought she'd turn on him. She needed to tell him immediately. He was in his study reviewing documents when she burst in. One look at her face and he was moving, pulling her into his arms. What happened? FBI. An agent named Richards approached me at the university. He wants me to testify against you, he said. She stopped, unwilling to repeat Richards' words about how Min-ho would destroy her. What did you tell him? No, I said no to everything. He exhaled slowly, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. I know, I have audio of the entire conversation. He was recorded the moment he approached you. He pulled back to look at her. This is going to escalate things. They'll try again harder. They'll make offers. They'll make threats. They'll try to convince you that leaving me is salvation. I won't leave. Even if they tell you I've done something unforgivable, even then, she cupped his face. I already know you're unforgivable, Min-ho. I love you anyway. Something broke in his expression, genuine emotion overwhelming the control. He kissed her with desperate intensity, and she could feel the fear beneath it. Fear that she'd leave him, fear that his world would take her, fear that his love was strong enough to destroy her. Marry me tomorrow, he said against her lips. Not in 3 weeks, tomorrow. What? The FBI just accelerated everything. They'll be watching, waiting for leverage. I need to marry you now before they can use you against me. And more importantly, I need to know you're legally mine in every way that matters. She should have hesitated, should have insisted on the planned wedding, on tradition, on not allowing fear to dictate their timeline. Instead, she said, okay. They married in a temple at sunset with only his brothers and closest advisors present. There was no white dress. Maya wore crimson silk, a nod to both Korean tradition and the passionate darkness of their love story. Min-ho wore black, looking like the prince of shadows he was, his brothers cried. She didn't know them well. Min-ho kept her separate from most of his world, but she could see the love they had for their oldest brother and the relief that he'd found someone worth being vulnerable for. When Minho slid the ring on her finger, his hands were steady but his eyes betrayed him. He was terrified. Terrified of losing her, terrified of loving someone this much, terrified that his world would eventually consume her. "Promise you," he whispered, "I will spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of this choice." "I know," she said and kissed him. That night in his penthouse they finally stopped holding back. There was no awkwardness despite the months of anticipation. He undressed her slowly, reverently, kissing every inch of her skin like it was sacred. She touched him with tenderness, running her fingers over scars she glimpsed before, marks from a violent past she'd never fully know. When he entered her, it wasn't a claiming or a conquest. It was a merging, a final dissolution of the boundaries between them. He moved with careful intensity, watching her face, making sure every moment was about her pleasure as much as his own. "Love you," he whispered, against her throat, against her collarbone, against her heart. "I know," she gasped, her nails digging into his shoulders. "I love you too." When it was over, they lay in the darkness, her back against his chest, his arm curved protectively around her waist. His hand drifted down and splayed against her still flat stomach, as if he could already feel the child that would come. 3 weeks, he murmured. "By then you'll know." She placed her hand over his. "And what happens then? Then the world knows your mind, completely, irrevocably, and anyone who tries to hurt you, your family, the FBI, my enemies, anyone, they'll answer to me." She should have been frightened by the possession in his voice. She wasn't. She was coming to understand that his darkness and his devotion were two sides of the same coin. He couldn't love without claiming, he couldn't cherish without protecting. It was the language his soul had learned in a harsh world. "I'm okay with that," she whispered. "Claim me, Minho, make me yours." He pulled her closer and she felt him harden against her back. This time they made love slowly, with the kind of intimacy that transcended physicality. They were writing their future in the darkness, one touch at a time. 12 days after their secret wedding, the warehouse war escalated. Minho's rival, a man named Choi Dong-jun who controlled a significant portion of the drug trade in Busan, made a move that would have catastrophic consequences. Maya was at the university cafe when the news broke. Her phone erupted with texts from Minho's men. "Stay where you are. Don't go anywhere. Boss is handling." Then came the bigger alert from the news: explosion at Seoulport, unknown casualties, police investigating. She called Minho and he answered immediately, his voice tight. "I'm fine. Taesung is fine. Everyone is fine." "Happened. Dong-jun put a bomb in one of our shipment containers, tried to kill me and destroy our operations. He failed on both counts, but the explosion killed some of his own men. He's escalating because the FBI has been putting pressure on his operations. And he's trying to make a grab for our territory while we're supposedly vulnerable." "Ho, you need to listen to me very carefully," he said, his voice shifting to something harder. "I'm sending Taesung to pick you up. I want you to come to the compound instead of the penthouse. More security, more protection." "Okay." The line cut out. In the background she'd heard shouting, gunfire perhaps. Terror flooded through her. Taesung arrived 8 minutes later, moving her swiftly into a blacked-out SUV. The compound Minho had mentioned was a private estate on the outskirts of Seoul, heavily guarded, nearly impenetrable. They'd never taken her there before. It was where the violence lived, away from the gleaming city. She was shown to a secure room on the 3rd floor, its windows barred, its door keypad locked from the outside. Comfortable but undeniably a cage. Hours passed. Then the door opened and Minho stumbled in, his shirt torn and blood. God, so much blood staining his shoulder and arm. "Touch me," he said before she could move. "I'll contaminate you. I need to shower, but I needed to see you first." She moved anyway, helping him to a chair, examining the wound. A bullet grazed mostly, but deep enough to require stitches. "Sending you out of the country tomorrow," he said quietly. "London probably. You'll stay with a trusted associate who has no connection to my operations. You'll be safe there." She was already shaking her head. "This isn't negotiable, Maya." "Yes, it is." "I'm not leaving." She continued examining the wound. "You're leaving. We're both leaving. Take your brothers, take whoever you trust most, and we leave Seoul today. I can't abandon my empire." "You can. You can burn it down or hand it over or literally anything except die for it." She met his eyes. "Because that's what will happen if you keep playing this game with Dong-jun. He'll keep escalating and eventually someone will get through your security. Someone will take me. Someone will kill you. Then I'll kill him first. Then someone else will take his place. It never ends, Minho, not unless you choose to end it." He was quiet for a long moment. "If I walk away, I lose everything, my reputation, my empire, my honor. You lose none of that. You stop being a mafia king and become just Minho, a man who loves his wife, a man who's building a life instead of a legacy." She sat on his lap, being careful of the wound. "Tell me you haven't thought about it. Tell me there's no part of you that wants to just disappear with me and start over." He grabbed her waist, pulling her close, burying his face in her neck. "Every second of every day, but it's not possible, Maya. People depend on me. If I leave, that structure collapses and thousands of people suffer the consequences. So you sacrifice yourself instead, you and me, our future." She pulled back to look at him. "That's not honor, Minho, that's cowardice. It's choosing to hide in your empire rather than face the vulnerability of actually living." His expression hardened. "You don't understand my world." "I don't, but I understand you, and I know you're better than this." "Not better than this, Maya. This is what I am. This is what you chose to become because you thought you had no other options, but you do now. You have me. You have brothers who would follow you anywhere, and you have the choice to be different." She could see the war playing across his face, years of conditioning against the possibility of change. The man who'd built himself from nothing didn't know how to let it go. Give me 2 weeks, he finally said. Let me end things properly. Let me transfer operations to someone I trust. Let me make sure my empire doesn't collapse into chaos. 2 weeks and then we disappear. It wasn't ideal, but it was something. It was him moving toward her instead of away. Okay, she said, but Min-ho. Don't do anything that will give them more reason to come after us. No escalation, no more bloodshed. Try, it was the most honest thing he could have promised. The next 2 weeks were a chess match. Min-ho handled the transition with the precision he brought to everything. Redistributing territories, consolidating power, making strategic partnerships that would ensure the underworld's stability even as he withdrew. He was careful, methodical, and utterly controlled, but Maya could see the cost. She found him most nights in his study, staring at documents with hollow eyes. The man who'd been so vital and present was becoming a ghost, haunted by the gravity of what he was surrendering. On the 10th day, Seo-jun came to see her. He was quieter than his brothers, with soft eyes and a gentle way of speaking that betrayed the gentleness hidden beneath Min-ho's facade. I want you to know what you're saving him from, Seo-jun said, sitting across from her in the estate's garden. Min-ho took over the family business when he was 22 because father's legitimate ventures were failing and the family was about to lose everything. He spent the last 6 years in darkness, Maya, doing things that haunt him, becoming someone he never wanted to be. I know, she said softly. Do you? Because I think what you might not know is that father wanted this. He wanted Min-ho to find someone who could pull him back. Father was proud of the business Min-ho built, but he was more proud of the fact that his son hadn't lost his soul completely. Seo-jun smiled sadly. Thank you for giving him permission to stop. Love him. I know, he loves you too in a way that terrifies him. When father died, I thought Min-ho would become purely machine, but then you appeared, and suddenly he had something worth protecting that wasn't an empire. After Seo-jun left, Maya went to Min-ho's study and found him exactly where she'd expected, surrounded by paperwork, looking like a man at war with himself. Come with me, she said, taking his hand. She led him to the rooftop of the compound where the city lights sprawled before them like a kingdom he was letting go. The wind was cold, carrying the smell of winter and rain. Tell me about the first time you killed someone, she said quietly. He stiffened. Why? Because you're haunted by it. And I want to know who you were before the violence consumed you. I want to know the boy beneath the king. He was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, I was 19. A rival had threatened to take father's company, not through business competition, through violence. They killed 2 of our workers to make a point. I confronted them in an alley and, he paused. The man pulled a knife. I defended myself, but once I had the power over him, I chose to use it. I chose to kill him instead of letting him live. That was the moment I became a different person. Did you choose to kill him? Because I realized that in my world mercy is weakness, and weakness gets people you love destroyed. You were wrong, she said softly. Mercy isn't weakness, it's choice. It's the ability to do harm and choosing not to. That's what takes strength, Min-ho. That's what separates humans from monsters. He turned to look at her and she saw the boy he'd been before the violence glimpsed in the depths of his eyes. Terrified, he admitted. If I stop being the king, if I become just Min-ho, who am I? What do I have left? You have me. You have your brothers. You have the chance to build a life instead of an empire. You have the possibility of becoming who you were meant to be before tragedy demanded otherwise. She cupped his face. You have everything that matters. On the 14th day, Kang Min-ho transferred his entire criminal enterprise to his second-in-command with a completeness that shocked Seoul's underworld. The announcement came through official channels. The Cold Prince was retiring from active operations, transitioning power to Taesung and disappearing from the empire he'd built. The speculation was immediate and intense. Was he sick? Was he in hiding? Had his enemies finally caught up with him? But the most shocking rumor, and the one that spread fastest through Seoul's society, was that he'd married a foreign woman and was starting over. By that evening, their faces were everywhere. The wedding photos released to the press, carefully orchestrated to look spontaneous. Min-ho in black, Maya in crimson silk, their connection unmistakable. The Cold Prince finally human, the FBI agent Richards showed up at the penthouse that evening fuming. You married her. That's your solution? Min-ho answered the door himself, already packed for their departure. I married her because I love her. The fact that it complicates your investigation is merely a bonus. She could still testify. She won't. She's my wife, and even if she weren't, she has no interest in your case. Min-ho stepped closer, his presence suddenly threatening despite his supposed retirement. You should also know that I've transferred all operational control to my successor. I'm no longer a criminal asset. I'm just a man leaving the country with his wife. If you pursue us, if you make this difficult in any way, the only leverage I have left is my ability to destabilize Seoul's underworld from abroad. And I will burn it down, detective. Everything I built, I will watch burn rather than allow it to be used against my wife. Richard studied him for a long moment. You're serious. Completely. Detective left and Min-ho walked into the bedroom where Maya was putting the last items into her suitcase. Where are we going? She asked. Anywhere, he said. Everywhere. Nowhere matters as long as you're there. They left Seoul that night on a private jet that belonged to a contact Min-ho had cultivated over years. As the city disappeared beneath them, Maya watched Min-ho relax in a way she'd never seen before, as if the weight he'd carried for so long was finally lifting. They settled in Lisbon in a small villa on the coast, away from Korean society and the long reach of organized crime. For the first time in 8 years, Minho lived without soldiers, without violence, without the constant calculation of power. It took him 3 months to stop sleeping with a knife under his pillow. By then, Maya knew she was pregnant. The test confirmed what they'd both suspected. She was exactly 3 weeks along, which meant their child had been conceived on their wedding night or very close to it. They laughed about the precision of Minho's prediction, and he pressed kisses to her still flat stomach while his brothers, who they'd arranged to meet in Barcelona, took photos like this was the most important news ever delivered. Minho found work at a local NGO, using his financial expertise to help them track and prevent human trafficking. It was ironic, perhaps, that he was using skills learned in a criminal empire to dismantle the very operations he once profited from. It feels like penance, he said one evening sitting on their villa's balcony with a glass of wine watching the sunset paint the Atlantic in shades of orange and gold. It's not penance, Maya said, resting her head against his shoulder. It's redemption. You're choosing to use your power for something good. Because of you, she corrected, because of you. You chose this, Minho, you walked away, you chose to be someone different. He wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. I still have nightmares about the people I've hurt, about the families destroyed by my operations. I know, but you're not that person anymore. You're the man who's saving families instead. That matters. Peace, it turned out, was something Minho could never fully claim. On the day their daughter was born, a beautiful girl with her mother's honey-brown skin and her father's intense dark eyes, the news came. Choi Dong-jun had been arrested by international authorities, finally brought down by the evidence Minho had gathered and the operations he'd transferred strategically before leaving Seoul. And Seo-jun, Minho's beloved youngest brother, was now the official leader of what remained of the empire, a legitimate businessman operating in the careful space between light and shadow that Minho had once occupied. The circle had closed. The power had passed. The violence would continue, but not by Minho's hand. He held their daughter named Jaiwoo with trembling hands and cried, completely cried for the first time in 16 years. I did it, he whispered to her tiny face. I got out. We got out. Maya watched from the hospital bed, her heart full and breaking simultaneously. This man had given up an empire for her. He'd surrendered power, violence, and legacy for the possibility of being just Minho, for the possibility of being a father instead of a king. On their daughter's first birthday, they renewed their vows in a small ceremony at their villa, with their extended family present. Minho's brothers, a few of Taesung's trusted men who'd become something like family, and Maya's parents who'd finally come to terms with their daughter's extraordinary choice. Minho stood before their gathered loved ones and spoke without notes, his words raw and unguarded. A year ago, I was a man defined by his worst self. I measured my worth in territories controlled and enemies defeated. I believed that love was weakness and that the only way to protect people was to terrify them. Then Maya walked into my life and shattered every certainty I'd built myself around. He looked directly at her, and she saw the man she glimpsed in those early moments, the boy he'd been before violence claimed him. She taught me that strength isn't about control. It's about choosing vulnerability. It's about putting down weapons and picking up a child. It's about being soft with someone and discovering that softness makes you stronger, not weaker. She gave me permission to stop being a king, and in exchange I became a man, a husband, a father. He turned to their daughter, sleeping in her mother's arms. And most importantly, a father who won't teach his child that love requires dominance, that protection requires cruelty, that power is worth more than peace. He pulled out a new ring, not a claim, but a symbol of partnership, and slipped it on Maya's finger beside the diamond he'd given her over a year ago. Vow to spend the rest of my life being worthy of the choice you made, to being gentle when you need gentleness, strong when you need strength, and honest about the darkness that still lives in me, to loving our daughter in a way that shows her what real love looks like. And to never ever taking for granted the miracle that you chose me, despite knowing exactly how broken I was. There wasn't a dry eye in the villa. That night after their daughter was asleep, Minho made love to his wife with a tenderness that had grown even deeper over the year. And when it was over, when they lay in the darkness wrapped around each other, Maya felt something shift, a final acceptance perhaps, or a final healing. I'm pregnant again, she whispered. She felt him smile against her neck. I know, I've been watching you for the past week. The way you moved, the scent of your body chemistry shifting. When, 8 weeks, I wanted to be sure before I told you. He moved to rest his hand against her stomach, and she could feel the joy radiating from him, the pure, uncomplicated joy of a man who'd learned to feel again. A son this time, he predicted. Someone to break the cycle, someone to teach that his father isn't a king or a criminal, but a man who chose love. You can't predict the baby's sex from how I'm feeling, Minho. He laughed, genuinely laughed, and she remembered why she'd fallen in love with him, not despite his darkness, but because of the light he'd always carried underneath, even when he'd tried to bury it. I can predict anything, he said with mock seriousness. I'm a reformed crime lord with the power of love on my side. I'm unstoppable. She hit him with a pillow, and he caught her wrists, and they tumbled together in the darkness, laughing like they were young and dangerous and invincible, which she supposed they were in a way that transcended violence or power. They were invincible because they'd chosen each other, because they'd refused to let the world's darkness define their love. The villa in Lisbon had grown. What had once been a quiet refuge was now a home filled with the sound of children's laughter. Jaiwoo, 5 years old, had her mother's creativity and her father's intensity. And little Minjun, 3 years old, had his mother's heart and his father's devastating smile. Minho worked full-time with international NGOs now, his expertise in criminal networks making him invaluable in the fight against human trafficking. He'd also become a consultant on organized crime for several governments. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that the man who'd once built an empire was now helping to dismantle them. The FBI agent Richards had actually reached out 2 years ago with a job offer. Minho had declined, but not unkindly. He'd chosen his path, and it didn't include working within official systems. On this particular evening, he sat on their balcony watching the sunset, a glass of wine in one hand and his sleeping son in his arms, when Maya emerged with Jaiwoo perched on her hip. "Story time," Jaiwoo announced. "Daddy, tell us about the time you were a king." Minho smiled at his daughter, then looked at his wife. Permission, understanding. 1,000 small moments of partnership compressed into a single glance. "Once upon a time," he began, settling back in his chair as Maya sat beside him, their family complete, "there was a man who thought he was a king. But he was wrong," as he told their story, carefully edited for 5-year-old sensibilities. Transforming violence into metaphor and empire into a kingdom of the heart, Maya rested her head on his shoulder and closed her eyes. This was the happy ending that seemed impossible when they'd first met on that rainy Seoul rooftop. This was the life she'd asked him to choose when he was still convinced that love required possession and protection required cruelty. He'd learned. She'd taught him, and he'd learned, and now he was teaching their daughter that real power lay not in what you could take from the world, but in what you could build with the people you loved. The sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson and deepest blue. In the distance, the Atlantic whispered against the rocks, eternal and patient. And Minho, the king who'd surrendered his crown, the criminal who'd become human, the man who'd learned that vulnerability was its own form of strength, held his family close and thought about the curious alchemy of love. How it transformed not through grand gestures or violent claiming, but through small moments day after day, choice after choice, until one day you realized you become someone entirely new, someone better, someone worthy, someone finally truly loved. Why?